Hello, hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Syracuse Sports presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. My name is Brent Axe. It is great to be here as always. I want to thank you for subscribing on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. It's Thanksgiving week, right? I am thankful for you for taking in this show, for subscribing to this show, because you can listen on demand when you want, not only to Syracuse Sports, but to our Syracuse football and basketball post-game shows as well. And we do certainly thank you for that. We are very thankful for you. Got a great show lined up for you today. The rightful owner of the 1987 Heisman Trophy, get out of here with this Tim Brown nonsense, Don McPherson, former Syracuse quarterback, is going to join me to discuss Kyle McCord, the impact he's had on the program, Fran Brown, the impact he's had on the program, our alumni relations between former players and the current administration improving under Fran Brown. That was something that Don has been honest in the past was a little strained. Is it getting better? Coach Mack, now on the Ring of Honor at the JMA Wireless Dome. Man, did Don have some awesome Coach Mack stories. As you can imagine, some he's told, others maybe not as much. So great conversation, football and otherwise, coming up with the great Don McPherson. I did want to open the show with this, though. Recently, a Syracuse women's basketball coach, Felisha Legette-Jack, went to a press conference after Syracuse had lost to Albany at the Dome. And let's just mark the tape here for a second. Syracuse had not lost a non-conference game at the Dome since 2006. When they lost to Albany this past Wednesday night, that was the second non-conference game they had lost at the Dome in 10 days because they had also lost to St. Joseph's, right? So this team under 500, at 500, of course, trying to move on from Deasia Fair, one of the most legendary players in the history of Syracuse, let alone the third leading scorer in NCAA women's basketball history, right? Trying to establish an identity, trying to, find their way in the season. And it's not going the way that they foresaw, right? So I would encourage you to watch this whole press conference. It's on YouTube. You can check it out. But I cut a couple clips out because Coach Jack came to a press conference, and man, was she fired up.
This is what I've been trying to tell these young people on our team. Like, nobody cares about our program. Nobody cares about women's basketball. It's evident how, it's not nobody's fault, but, the laughing and all that fun stuff, nobody's into it like we are, and that's okay. But I try to get our kids to understand we got to be so locked into us that we don't see that the fan base is like 12 people here. We got to see that we can't see people that's not on the court, not really locked in. Because it's about our dreams. It's about our decision that we're going to rise above it all.
That's one clip from Coach Jack. Here is
we're not playing negative. We don't deal with negativity at all. This was my home when I was in Indiana, when I was in Hofstra, when I was at Buffalo. It's always going to be my home, whether I'm playing here or there. But we're not going to. The first thing we're playing for is each other, and we're not going to get it twisted. We got to close the noise out, whatever that noise is, and if they're real fans and really love me like I think they should, they come to the game and really be a part of this thing, and not just send 30 people to this game. So I'm disappointed in my fan base here. If I'm home and it's supposed to be home, prove it. Okay? This is ridiculous. I'm the one coach that's from this place, and this is the respect that we get here. And the day is what? Wednesday. So, after a while, my mom always said, you can love somebody, but if they ain't loving you back, you got to love somebody else. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Some strong words there from Coach Felisha Legette-Jack. I left out the clip, by the way, where she dropped an F-bomb at that press conference. Nobody effing cares about this program. Now, the following day, Thursday, she did go on the radio. She apologized for her language, but her message was the same in wanting support from local fans and what Syracuse women's basketball needs to succeed in the NIL era and the transfer portal era, saying they lost Alyssa Latham from last year's team to Tennessee because they weren't even in the ballpark of the kind of NIL money that Tennessee was offering. Now, Tennessee is obviously one of the most established and successful women's basketball programs in the history of the sport. So Syracuse is certainly not on that level, or a UConn or a South Carolina, right? But Coach Jack, You felt the pain. She felt disrespected. The fans haven't been there, especially for somebody who has put in blood, sweat, and tears in Central New York, is from Central New York, and wishes she got more support from Central New Yorkers. I have mixed feelings on this because I feel like that is appreciated by people here in Central New York. You root for one of your own. When that job came up, when the Coach Q scenario happened at Syracuse and that job came open, I was one of the people that campaigned for Felisha Legette-Jack to be the next head coach here. I was the one who campaigned the loudest for Felisha Legette-Jack's jersey to be honored by Syracuse University, that they had to honor the first female athlete at Syracuse, and she was the natural one. And I was happy that Syracuse saw it that way, and now they've retired several female jerseys since. So that's great. And I think people appreciate that Felisha Legette-Jack has skin in the game in Syracuse, New York. She understands it. She gets the community, and she wants to win, not just because she's a coach in the ACC or at a Syracuse or a Division I level. She cares about this program. She has her heart in it. That's all appreciated. That is also not a reason that I will tell my family, let's go to a basketball game on a random Wednesday night to see the University of Albany. We got a few comments here from our Syracuse Sports insiders that I wanted to highlight about this. And being a Syracuse Sports insider means you get to text me directly your thoughts, opinions, questions, insight, and analysis on Syracuse Sports. I do the same, not only individually to you, but to our whole group. It's growing by the day, and being a Syracuse Sports insider makes you a part of one of the more passionate Syracuse sports fan communities out there. You can try it free for 2 weeks. It's just $3.99 a month. After that, we would love for you to join today. Join subtext.com/Syracuse Sports, and your comments are highlighted exclusively on this podcast. We do not react to social media. We do not react to anything but your comments here. This is your portal, and you get your voice heard exclusively on this podcast. Mark C. said this: we're first-time season ticket holders for women's basketball, primarily because seasons are a much better value than buying 4 or 5 individual games like we've done in the past. Coach's comments make me feel like my support is not appreciated. I should add this, too, as Mark noted to me in his texts, that he also, it's not, as he put it, it's not huge dollars, but as part of his tailgate and some other things, they do donate to the program. They do donate some NIL money, set up appearances for players. Like, he's got some money and some skin in the game, and I think a lot of people felt the way he did, including JR. It's not sitting well for me as a season ticket holder for women's basketball. I bought them specifically this year to support her, pardon me. And it kind of makes me regret it. Nigel says, I thought it was insulting to us fans of the women's team that have gone for years. Nobody cares. If I didn't care or wasn't invested, I wouldn't be upset after this loss. But that's not the case. And I can speak to Nigel. He was texting me about that game unsolicited before Coach Jack had her post-game comments. Now, I should note, in her radio interview, she did say she thanks the fans that are coming, and she appreciates those fans that are coming, that base. They're averaging just over 2,000 fans per game. And look, that's the thing. No matter how successful this program has been, Deasia Fair, Brittany Sykes, high-level players, they went to the Final Four in 2016. They've had one losing season since 2006, and that was in an interim year under Vaughn Reed in between Coach Q and Coach Jack. Winning has not been an issue for this program. They win. They've had big names. They've had stars. They've had a draw. But this has historically been an issue for Syracuse, particularly since they moved to the JMA Wireless Dome. When you have 2,000-3,000 people at a game, even peak when you have promotions or things of that nature, there's 8,000 or 9,000. You're in a cavernous football facility, right? That's why Jim Boeheim initially didn't want to go to the then Carrier Dome, right? Because you talk about 30, 35,000 seats here. So it looks bad. And that was the most common response I got from people. Well, if they played in a smaller arena, it wouldn't look so bad, which I think is kind of disingenuous. If they played in a smaller arena, that would not inspire you to go, right? You're not going now because they play in the Dome, but if they played in a 10,000-seat arena, you'd buy season tickets. I don't know if I buy that. You're not wrong that it would be a better atmosphere, and it would be better for them generally because it does look bad. I mean, Coach Jack was reacting to what she did not see in the Dome that night, but I feel like that's, look, not only is that a little disingenuous, it's not going to happen anytime soon. We need solutions for the problem that exists now. And I don't know if I have a solution, guys. But I want to go to one final comment here because I think that Jack W. nailed this. Okay, here it is. That kind of reaction is more likely to hurt her cause than to help it. People aren't going to be guilted into coming out to games. Sports is entertainment. If you aren't entertaining, people will find other things to do. And if you try to make them feel like they owe you something, they'll probably just stop paying attention to you at all. Can I give that a standing ovation? Because Jack nailed it. Sports is entertainment. Syracuse women's basketball is entertainment. It is sports. I think there's a word that gets used here a lot, and it's not just for this scenario. I hear it a lot in college sports. And that word is deserves. They deserve your support. They work hard. I work hard. You work hard. That doesn't mean I'm going to spend my money to go watch a certain thing, or, they worked hard filming a movie. Doesn't mean I have to go watch the movie if it's bad, right? If the product is not worth my time, my investment, right? Make me want to be there. That's your job. And that is as hard as it's ever been in an era where everything lives on your phone. I've got a Netflix queue I can go to. My entertainment options have been plentiful, right? It's harder to stand out today. You have to go viral to stand out. And frankly, Coach Jack got a lot more attention for a random Wednesday night game, which they lost, keep in mind, to Albany than she would have otherwise. So it was smart in that sense. And she admitted that in her radio interview Thursday. She's glad she said what she said. Maybe the message didn't come across the way she wanted it to, but people are reaching out. What can I do? So I'll be as curious as anybody at that next home game, which is December 1st against Yale, which, by the way, Coach, you got my attention. I'm going to go to that game, which is a noon tip-off on a Sunday afternoon, an NFL Sunday. The Bills don't play till Sunday Night Football, so frankly, that helped me motivate to go to that game but that's part of it. Guys, I'm not missing a Bills game to go watch a Syracuse women's basketball game on a Sunday afternoon, right? The competition they have is not only with my phone and with, entertainment options that are out there. It's in direct competition at times with the most popular sport on earth. I wouldn't go to a men's basketball game on a Sunday afternoon as a fan. I would if I was assigned to it, of course, per this job, if the Bills were on. There's a lot of people out there that, what is your Buffalo Bills? What is your thing that you're not going to brush aside to go watch women's basketball or whatever the case may be, right? So that's what you're up against. But I don't know if you minor league baseball this thing, more promotions, more giveaways, which they do. It's not like Syracuse. They've had Dog Day. They have Kids Day where local school children go to games. They've done these things, right? And that's the other fallback people. Well, they need to be marketed better. You're not wrong to say that, but it's not like they're not marketed. They're not on social media. They're not checking the boxes that they need to. It just comes back to what Jack said. Guilt is not a marketing strategy. Because you're a born and bred Syracusan doesn't make me obligated to go to a game. I appreciate that, but I think the message came across in the wrong way. I get what she's saying. I get what she desires and what she wants, but that's just it. At the end of the day, you got to make me want to be there. With how you play, what you are, it is entertainment. If they fix that problem, maybe more people would come, but maybe there isn't an answer to this. Maybe, not to use this old expression, but it kind of is what it is at this point. And I would love to see it improve. I would love to see it improve for other programs at Syracuse. This is the topical one here, but maybe that's the reality nobody wants to admit. There might not be an answer to this. And whatever that answer is, I don't think anybody's thought of it. It has to be organic. It has to be something that inspires people, that motivates people. And the central message in all of this, make me want to be there. Don't make me feel obligated to be there. So we'll see how that goes forward, and certainly passionate words from Coach Jack. And I appreciate her passion, and I appreciate a lot what she's done for the program. I said at the beginning of this, I campaigned for her to be the coach, and we're seeing the fruit of that labor in a lot of ways. We'll see how this season goes, but I don't know. Ultimately, she got the attention she was seeking, but will she get the results she was seeking from it is the fascinating question. Don McPherson had a lot of great answers to my questions about Coach Mack, Kyle McCord, the state of alumni relations, and so much more. So we're going to play that conversation coming up. But just a reminder that we are seeking your original music here on Syracuse Sports. Now, I've gotten a lot of feedback from bands that are from Syracuse, including our featured artist today, and that's awesome. But I just want to reiterate here, you do not have to be a band based in Syracuse, New York. You could be anywhere. If you're listening to this pod and watching this pod, you certainly have a connection one way or the other to Syracuse, so I get that. But your original music, no matter where you are, we'd love to feature it here on Syracuse Sports. And our artist today is a new band out there. They're called Overtired. Their debut album is A Day in the Grief. And a song we're going to play here is called Familiar. These guys came on my radar screen recently. Sometimes you reach out to me, and all the information is in the show notes if you want to reach out on how to get your original music featured here on Syracuse Sports. I reached out to this band because I love their sound and happy to highlight their song Familiar. So we're going to hear a little bit of it now. We'll play the whole song at the end of the podcast, which we could also do for you. Get in touch. And all the information on Overtired is in the show notes. So let's hear a little bit of Familiar, and then we'll talk to a familiar face, our friend Don McPherson. Okay, now, disclaimer here, Don McPherson and I are speaking before Syracuse plays UConn. So if, like, something extraordinary happens at the Dome on Saturday, don't hold it against us because we're recording this before the game. But first, before we get into any of that, good to see you, my friend. How are things?
Things are good. Good to see you as well.
Kyle McCord, let's start there, has come in, and Don, they have won the transfer portal lottery with this guy.
Yeah.
Right? I know the portal is still in its infant stages here, but to get a quarterback to come in, set records, instant chemistry, knows the coach, knows players on the team, leads the team, is the reason this team has there's other reasons certainly, but has been the primary reason this team has been successful and has won at least one more game than a year ago, no matter how the season plays out here. Like, it's not supposed to work this way, but it did with Kyle McCord. So let's just start there and what your view has been of somebody parachuting in and doing all these things that usually take years, right? A few years to build up.
You know, I think it's impossible to talk about McCord's success and to the point you made, coming in the transfer portal in his last year with 1 year and all that, without talking about the fact that he came in with Fran Brown. Had there been an established program here and an established team with a coach who had his own philosophy and had been built upon, all of a sudden you have to inject the guy into something that's been established. It's a little bit more difficult. But they came in fresh together. And you know, Fran Brown handed him the keys to the castle and said, you know, this is your team, run with it with a bunch of new guys. So there's this sort of a spirit of we're all in this for the first time together. And so therefore Kyle can just sort of own more of the offense, own more of what's going on because he's the first one to do it. It's kind of like, you know, my years with George DeLeon, we were the first ones to do it. And so I got to own it. I owned that offense. I knew it better than anyone because we were the first ones to do it. And so Kyle McCord has that same benefit of not having someone said, oh, well, this is his comparison to anyone else, his leadership styles, all those things. And the players that were here, Gatson and LaQuint Allen, they were dying for this kind of leadership.
Yeah.
They were dying for somebody to come in with some broad shoulders, some experience, with some decisiveness to his style of play. And so the guys just rallied around him. I think it was a perfect fit, perfect time with Fran Brown coming in new as well.
What has impressed you the most, Don, about what Kyle McCord has done? It could be football or otherwise.
I think it's a lot of what I just said. It's handling this sort of newness in a program that people think from the outside Syracuse is this big time established program, but it's this program that's been struggling. And so he came in and took the leadership role very seriously. I think that's been a big. He has a very steady demeanor. Just watching from a distance, that is very important in a quarterback. And then the other thing I have to say is his ability to help the offense in ways that it needed help. Like I said, decisiveness, his ability to move in the pocket, to give some extra time in the pass game for his offensive line, his ability to get rid of the ball quickly in the short passing game. They throw the ball a ton and control the clock better than any team I've ever seen with the pass in the pass game. And that's a function of his decisiveness, and what we haven't had in Syracuse in a long time is a quarterback who gets rid of the ball quickly.
He reads defenses almost instantly, gets rid of the ball quickly, knows where he wants to go with it. And there's been some instances this year, not to pick on anybody, but it's not McCord's fault, right? The receiver wasn't where they were supposed to be, but that's what he does, and really just translates that, for lack of a better term, quickly. So given that we're in an era where, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and those guys are like, that's what you'll want, right? McCord can scramble, but it's not a strength of his. How do you think this is going to translate at the next level here? And when he goes through these NFL evaluations, because that seems to be kind of literally the weight around his ankles that might hold him back from getting drafted a little higher than maybe you'd think somebody with his numbers would.
He's incredibly accurate when he knows where he's going with the football, and I think the times that he may struggle is in his second and third reads and getting to them. Sometimes you don't know if he ever gets to them because the offensive line protection may break down, but he's incredibly accurate, and he has a good release, and I think the things he's shown this year, again, I'm not studying his game when he was at Ohio State that much, was his ability to move the buy time in the pocket with his feet. And I've been very impressed with it, and it's subtle. It's not something you would it's not a scramble. It's just a step or two left or right, or retreating. It gives him an extra second or two to get the ball off. And so I think those are the things that NFL scouts can look and see. Okay, if you're struggling with the O-line, does he have the ability to make those adjustments in his mechanics that allows him to complete passes? And he's been very, very efficient and effective at that.
So we're always thinking about what's next, Don, and I'm thinking about who's going to quarterback this team in 2025, and we'll see what they do in the portal and all those unpredictable things at this moment here. But Syracuse has a really tough schedule next year. You'd almost want McCord to parachute into that kind of schedule, but he's going to move on and make his way and try and get drafted, as we said here. So I'll frame the question this way as we sit here on November 22nd, right? And so much is going to happen. But do you think the starting quarterback for Syracuse football in 2025 is on the roster right now?
Probably not.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And I only say that with very little knowledge, of what the other guys can do, is that this day and age with transfer the way it is, and the way that programs are thinking, and kids, like I hate to say it, but they're kids, and you're gonna have guys in the portal who you might not have thought would be available, and then you might go after some guy. All of a sudden, there's a kid that's available, and so you just don't know. I think there's so much uncertainty across the board in college athletics and college football in particular, that you just don't know what's going to happen come January 1.
This is like the most random thought ever, but I have to say it because I think you would appreciate it. I think it's fascinating. The two of the best quarterbacks in Syracuse history, there's McCord and McPherson.
And McNabb.
And McNabb, right. Like,
what's
the deal with that? What's
the mix? As Mac would say, he's a Mac, we're a Mick.
Exactly. What's going on there? Like, we have to do like a history of that surname there. That's incredible to think about there. You mentioned Fran Brown, right? This doesn't happen without Fran Brown, and we're about a year later since he's been hired, and so much has happened. Again, no matter how this season finishes, I think people are feeling pretty good about what they're seeing there. I'll ask you the same question I asked about McCord. What has impressed you the most about Fran coming in here and what he is doing with this program and the tone that he's setting and Dart and the whole thing?
I think you just mentioned it. He came in with not necessarily a system, but with an attitude, and the Dart attitude of what he wanted to instill in his players. That's what you go back to. I was talking on a college campus recently, and I was talking about their core values. You have to have core values if you, to know how to get through adversity, to have a North Star, something that you're driving towards. And he's coming with that. He came in talking about Dart. He stuck to it. And even in bad games like that Pitt game, he said, "Okay, we're just going to stay the course." And I think that's what you need to have. And especially as a young coach, you don't want to see a young coach panic and all of a sudden get away from his values because the winds are shifting, or maybe the media's talking a little bit different, or maybe the players aren't responding. He has stayed the course on what he came in on, and that kind of consistency is not just how you build a program, but it's how you build a culture. Because then you start to attract people. You talk about going into the transfer portal. You're going to start to attract people who want to be a part of that culture, and that's what he's established. I think it's really been very effective. And it will be the thing that he can build upon in the future. And then everything else comes after that. The fan base comes after that, and the university comes after that when they see the consistency in his leadership.
What I liked, he said something the other day, and he said this a couple times, but he reiterated it the other day, Don, was when the portal came up, as it naturally was. The portal opens December 9th, so we're getting closer to that. And Fran was basically like, "Okay, great. If you want to go in the portal, hey, bye-bye. Like, that's on you. If you don't want to be a part of this thing, I'm not," he didn't say this, but my impression was, "I'm not going to beg you to stay." Yeah. Right? Like, this is who we are. Now that he's established it for a year, if you want to be a part of it, great. But there's certain guys you'll want to have conversations with. Like last year, he wanted OG to come back, and Justin Barron and Marlo Wax. Those are exceptions to the rule. But I kind of like that he's doing that. And I kind of like that he said, yeah, the portal is important and it's a part of it, but Syracuse leads the country in commitments for 2025. Like, recruiting is still a thing, even in this day and age of all the other extras out there, NIL included.
Yeah, and you have to remember two things about Fran Brown. One is that his background and his greatest quality was his ability to recruit, his ability to connect with young men and attract them to that school. And so that's his sort of philosophy. He's not a go out into the marketplace kind of guy who's going to go pick something off the shelf. He's going to go nurture and bring in and recruit. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, think about the coaches that he's coached under. Kirby Smart and Greg Schiano. These are old school guys who are not out there going, I'm gonna have to convince you to come here. If you don't want to come here, bye-bye, right? Like, if you don't want to come here, you want to be a part of what we're doing. If you want to be a part of this culture, go somewhere else, because we don't want you here if you're not going to be a part of the culture. And so I agree with you. It's really impressive. And it's how, once again, it's how you build that culture. When you say, if you're here, you're here. You're part of what we're doing. That's how you, and by the way, talent is talent. There's a ton of college football talent out there. I mean, just watch the game last night. It was it's sort of an insignificant game. Georgia Tech, NC State. Wow, there was talent on that field. There's a ton of talent. It's culture. You have to get guys to buy into what you're doing, and that means you have to be consistent. And that also means you have to be almost a little bit, and this is what you detect a little bit of Fran Brown's statement, is a little bit arrogant.
Yeah.
Right? This is the best place you're ever going to walk on. This is the best campus you're ever going to be a part of. And you have to make people convince them that this is the place that they need to be.
I think it's partly arrogance. And I'll say this, Don, you've dealt with coaches and people out there. You need a little a-hole in you to be a good coach, right? You have to be direct. You have to convince somebody, like, this is where you want to be. Like, you're a leader of men. Like, that's exactly part of it, right? Like, exactly. You want people to say things like, I will run through a wall for that guy, all the cliches, right? And Fran certainly has that. And it's a quieter confidence than some people out there. But when he talks, you listen, and there's just something that draws you to it. So, yeah, I certainly picked up on that for sure. When Fran came in, Don, a little bit of a subject change, but a little broader here, but something that he mentioned, and you and I have talked about this before. He made it from a point from day one that he wants former players around. He wants to connect with alumni. He wants that to be a thing, right? It's almost a year later since he said that at his opening press conference, and you were very honest with me in a prior conversation that it wasn't the best in previous administrations here. You're not going to fix it in a year's time, but is it improving? How do you see alumni relations now?
I always go back to Robert Drummond, who's a JD, James Witt kid who's from the city, who's still here, who loves this town, loves the university, and the football program. When Robert Drummond's happy, I'm happy. That means that there's a place for Robert Drummond, at Lally and with the program, and that's one of my litmus. The other one, Alban Brown, who was a teammate of mine back in the '80s. His son is on the team now. Those kinds of things weren't happening previously, and so those are great signs, and we have to build on those things. I still think we always can do better, and we haven't done a great job over the years. And it's got to take more than Fran Brown. It's got to take the university as well, reaching out and making things easier for guys to come back and be around the program. But Fran has been excellent. He's been excellent in having guys come to practice. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not a guy who hangs around and goes to practice. But the guys who do that have felt very welcome. And I mentioned Lally. I ran into him not too long ago, and he said, "Yeah, I get out to practice, and Fran brings the guys around and." Every now and then has somebody talk to the team and do those sorts of things. So he's done a great job with it. He continues to do a great job with it, and we're going to be a better program for that effort.
I think the beacon you mentioned is a good one in Robert Drummond, because I've seen him at practices. I don't get to go to practice during the season, but in spring and in training camp, we get to go. And there was a noticeable difference of recognizable faces around that.
Yep.
And the look they had on their face, or when I would talk to them, it was almost like relief in a way. Like, it feels good to be back here, right? Lally, I mean, John Lally wouldn't be spending literally millions of dollars to improve this thing if he didn't feel that there was a return on that investment and it was appreciated, and that he felt and other players felt welcome. So you're right. I think it can be better, but it does feel like progress has been made.
Yes.
And you want to continue to see that. Like, okay, like for the first time, I feel like they can build on something. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Don, speaking of alumni, Coach Mac, God love you. He's on the Ring of Honor at the Dome now, and we have spoken over the years. You've told a million Coach Mac stories, right? Like, we could fill a book with those. Maybe we should. Maybe we'll sell a few books if we did that, right? He's such an extraordinary person to talk about. But two things I wanted to ask you. First, I want to go back to the beginning. Like, tell me about your first conversation with Coach Mac. Was it like the Fran Brown thing? Did you know right away I want to play for this guy? Or, like, what was the process like when you first connected with him?
So the name similarity, you have to understand, was a part of the relationship.
Yeah.
I was a all Long Island kid, and there was an all Long Island dinner, and George O'Leary. For those who remember George O'Leary, coach at Liverpool, that was a great coach here at Syracuse, was the one who recruited me off of Long Island. George O'Leary told Coach Mac that there was a family resemblance, and the name was similar, and that there was a family resemblance. Of course, O'Leary was just being O'Leary, and that's how Mac and I met, with almost a look of confusion on his face, like I was nothing like family. And then when I got here, and when we went through the whole process, I came up with my parents as a junior in high school, and the staff. What's interesting about Mac is he led with his staff. And so Bill Maxwell, I probably had more interaction with, because Mac led with the staff, and he always had that sort of, not necessarily in the background, but when he engaged with you, he was like a sponge. He just knew everything about you and everything about your family, and showed that he cared about those things. And I think one of the things that I always talk about is that when you played for him, you thought that he was just a lot of noise, just a lot of bluster, because he was constantly, with the loud sayings. That's why all the Macisms, right? If some nuts, candies, and nuts, right? All those things. And so it wasn't until years later when you realized the depth of what he was doing it's kind of what I was talking about with Coach Fran Brown, is that he was creating a culture, and it was about family, and it was about his faith and family that was at the foundation of it. And that's why some of our players now, we're so close, because we felt like we were part of that family.
Was that his dart? I was going to say, what was like the North Star for playing for Coach Mac?
I think it took him some time to find that. And I think that it was family, but it took time to find that, because he just went through sort of, when he got here, the team was struggling. We were just average throughout most of the 80s. And then as we matured, and he had me for 3 years, to have a quarterback, for 3 years is a long time to have a guy in for 4 years that with injuries. So there was some consistency that was built. And then when George DeLeon took over the offense again, he gave George DeLeon the offense and said, "It's yours." And he took a step back, and that allowed that offense to mature around George DeLeon. And it was ironic or interesting. Here I am talking about Coach Mack, and I'm really talking about his assistants, Bill Maxwell, George DeLeon, and George O'Leary, because he built a family, a coaching staff. They knew each other. A lot of them had coached at UMass and Springfield, and kind of come through the same tree through Connecticut and New England. And so he just built a culture here that was really quite remarkable in the family nature of that staff.
What you're saying speaks to something. When I think of Coach Mack, and I grew up here and transitioned in kind of a media role, so I've had two views of observation here. But there was a time, as you well know, Don, that Coach Mack could have run for mayor in this town and would have won in a landslide. Like he has become and was a figure beyond a football coach. And he was in the media and he did color commentary. But I know he's going on the Ring of Honor, and we certainly have to speak to his football accomplishments, but I feel like that's the appropriate honor for him in the sense because the Ring of Honor means more than what you did as a coach. I think of the man, the person, you mentioned his faith, how dedicated he was to the community, the personality, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's a pretty good football coach too, but he's just this larger than life figure. That's what I think of now, more than football. Does that make sense?
You ever see the for those of you, your viewers who might be too young to remember Cheers, and there was a time when Norm went to another bar and they said, "Norm," and they're like, "How do they know you here too? How can you do that and this?" Right? That was Mac. Anytime I'll never forget. One of my favorite stories about him was we were going up to A Bay and he wanted me to go with him to a golf outing for Kenny Drugs, and he loves going up to A Bay, and he said, "Hey, well, let's stop it on this guy's," and he wanted to stop it on somebody on the way up. He said it wasn't on the way up, and anyone who ever drove with Coach Mack, he was Mr. Magoo behind the wheel. Never saw a stop sign. Red lights were green, and so it was always an adventure. And we got lost, and everywhere we stopped for directions, everyone knew him. And I'm like, how do they, and he knew them. He was like, "Hey, Johnny, how's your grandmother?" And it's like, how do you know these people? And he just he was the most amazing people person I've ever met. And I don't mean people person in that he got along with everyone, because he would, curse you out just as soon as he, say hello to you if you got sideways with him. But he just absorbed people and listened to people and paid attention. It was fascinating to watch. It really was, because like I said, you go places with them being like, how is it possible that you know these people and they know you? And he was like everybody's grandfather. It was really actually quite remarkable to watch.
What a perfect summary of Coach Mack right there. Like in a nutshell, that is perfect right there. By the way, kids, if you haven't seen Cheers, like go find it on Tubi or wherever it is. It's a dog-eat-dog world, Sam, and I'm wearing Milk-Bone underwear. Normie was the best, so go check that out.
That's right.
So we got to tell a football story, right? Like talking about Coach Mack, the person is always fascinating to me, but what's a football story you don't tell that often, or maybe doesn't get out there enough about Coach Mack? We know about 87, and we know about, a lot of those moments that beating Nebraska in 84. Is there a football story that, I don't know, you kind of keep in the vault? Maybe it's not the story about Coach Mack, but it's one that stands out to you.
I don't know if this is in the vault, because I think it's probably have been told. But if you ask guys on that team, the 87 team that went undefeated, what was the most significant game? Some people might say Penn State or West Virginia. The most significant game for the 87 team was the 86 loss to Rutgers. And because we came out, offense came out, perfect drive right down the field, scored a touchdown. And then for some reason, the wheels come off. And after the games, typically on Sundays, the assistant coaches would do film study, offense at 2:00, defense at 6:00, or at the same time, basically. And then we do weights and all that kind of jazz. And Mac told the assistant coaches, take the day off. And I got film. And so the defense went like at 2:00, and the offense was supposed to show up like at 4:00. we got there and the film was not on, the projector was not on, and all we could hear was him ripping every defensive player in that meeting room.
Wow.
And then we waited our turn, and he went through the first drive that everyone thought, and it was in the paper, oh, what a great first drive, then they fell apart. He went through the first drive and pointed out what mistakes that everyone made on that drive. And he everybody, not just, he went through every single individual. And really what he talked about was the accountability to each other as players, that you have to do your job so this guy can do his job. And that there was no perfect drive, and he just he just took over. It was like the first time that he really leaned into the coach. All of a sudden, he was an assistant coach again. In my mind, that's where he went to. He kind of came out of that tower and he became a coach. And I don't think we lost the game after that. I think we lost maybe one in the last 6 that season, and it was about how do you prepare and how are you accountable to your teammates and not taking an opponent for granted, because we were supposed to beat Rutgers, right? It was just it was a maturity conversation that team was ready to lean into, but we didn't lean into it. We got beat into it by him.
That's an incredible story. I could just picture his booming voice in that room, probably saying a lot of words we can't repeat here, even on the internet, and just what that did. And that you've told the story before of the pledge that 87 team had, the dedication it took to go through and do that here. And I guess I'll conclude with this on Coach Mack, and this was after you had left and moved on to be a professional yourself. But what did you think about when he took that gig with the New England Patriots? Like, was it time to give it a shot at the NFL? Were you surprised he didn't succeed at the NFL? Like, when you look back on that, how do you look back on that?
Coach Mack loved New England. He and his wife Sandra, who and I have to say that probably one of the most amazing moments of my life when it comes to Coach Mack is I was a pallbearer at his funeral, but I was also a pallbearer at his wife Sandra's funeral. And to carry her casket back to him was one of the greatest gifts I've ever had in such a somber moment, because he loved his wife and he loved his family, and he loved New England, and he was a diehard with those things that he loved. And so Sandra was his heart. New England was his heart, and he had the opportunity to go coach the Patriots. And I know that was something that he probably had in his heart as well, of a dream to be able to be the head coach of the New England Patriots. I almost wish he hadn't done it. He had found, there's a interview with him in one of the videos of at the end of that 87 team. And he says that, when you're a young coach, you think it's 90% you, 10% the players. He said, then you get a little bit more mature as a coach and you think it's 50-50. He said, but then you get wise and you realize it's 90% the kids and 10%, and you're lucky if you're 10%. He says, and your job is to get them ready and then watch them go. That's the guy I had. I had the guy who said, it's 90% you and the players, and I'm going to get you ready, and I'm going to get out of the way and let you guys have fun. And I was fortunate because it fit my leadership style. It fit the way that I wanted. It wasn't the NFL way. And so to be that kind of, yes, I'm going to stay out of your way because you're a pro, but he still wanted to do that for young men. And it wasn't the right fit in New England. And the reason why I say I wish he hadn't done it is because it didn't end well and it didn't look well. The optics of it were of a guy who probably was past his prime trying to get a gig in the big show. And I think he had perfected the relationship with young men, college young men. And that's the way I always remember him. I kind of like tune out the Patriot years because I remember him as the guy who was just seemingly a cheerleader on the sideline for young men.
Speaking of working with young men, and we'll finish with this, Don, you mentioned you were on a college campus lately and you do great work out there. And I always like to get an update on that. Tell us, for those who aren't familiar, and maybe people have certainly heard it before, but it doesn't hurt to remind, the work you're doing these days with young men and speaking with athletes and others out there and how that's going for you.
So I've recently established a partnership with New York State, the Office for Prevention of Domestic Violence, and the YMCA's, the YMCA Alliance of New York State. So I'm going to be working with YMCA's in New York State, delivering something I call aspirational masculinity, and it's a new sort of initiative and a philosophy. We've been doing work, and I've been doing work around masculinity in the efforts of preventing men's violence against women. But I always say that I haven't been doing the work that our boys need, and so we need to have a positive, aspirational conversation with young men about what we want for them, not just what we want them to not do or avoid, or not what we want them to do to protect women and girls, but how do we help boys and men live their whole, as I say, whole, authentic, whole, and evolving lives. I want them to live in awe, AWE. And so that's what I'm about to launch that program across New York State.
Excellent. Always great to hear that you're doing such awesome work on there, and keep us updated on that for sure.
Absolutely.
Don, it's always great to talk to you and share stories, and I appreciate your perspective on all these things today. I know we'll do it again down the road, but thank you so much, as always, for hopping on with us here on Syracuse Sports, my friend.
Always my pleasure, Brent. Thank you.
Thanks again to Don McPherson, the rightful owner of the 1987 Heisman Trophy, if you ask me, for joining us here. Great insight on a number of things Syracuse football was. Great coach backstory. Mr. Magoo. That's fantastic. So thank you, Don, for your insight, as always, in the important work that you do out there. Thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders, of course, for your great text, insight, questions. You know what really makes me happy is our Syracuse Sports Insiders. So I get texts from you guys that say, hey, I can't use my tickets to, and in this case, a lot of insiders got to go to the Syracuse-UConn football game because other insiders were like, I can't use my tickets. I want an insider to go. And they'll send me a text, and I'll send you guys a text, and it's just become like a ticket exchange. So another great benefit to being a Syracuse Sports Insider, not only the latest information, insight, analysis on Syracuse sports from me, direct text message access to me, an outlet for you to text during games. And I love the back and forth that we have about Syracuse sports and other things that tend to come up. Who knows? You might end up getting some free tickets out of the deal, right? So thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders. We'd love for you to join the family at joinsubtext.com/Syracuse Sports. It's $3.99 a month, less than $1 a week, but you can try it free for 2 weeks. So check that out. Big week ahead. Syracuse, Miami coming up at the Dome on Saturday. Syracuse, Cornell hoops on Wednesday. I'll have our Syracuse basketball postgame show after that. Syracuse football postgame after Syracuse and Miami. A couple other goodies we're working on for you here this week. It's Thanksgiving week, and again, can't thank you enough for being listeners and watchers of this podcast. I would be greatly appreciative if you would subscribe, follow, whatever it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. So when a new episode of Syracuse Sports pops up, you won't miss it, and you can listen and watch on demand. So thank you. Thank you so much for all that you do as insiders, as listeners to this pod. It is greatly appreciated by yours truly and everybody here at syracuse.com. Your local music, your original music can be highlighted here on Syracuse Sports. All the information in the show notes on how you can get in touch. All the information is in the show notes on this great band taking us out today with their song Familiar off their debut album, A Day in the Grief. Check them out. Great, a band based right here in Syracuse, New York. Let's hear a little bit more of Familiar from Overtired to take us out here on Syracuse Sports, presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. We'll talk to you next time, guys.